Welcome to Fashion And with me, Schiavone, Fashion Curator. Just a reminder that you can keep up to date with everything Fashion And by following @Fashion And with Schiavone on Instagram and by hitting that subscribe button. This is Fashion and Halston, Chris Royer, model and Muse. Okay, so in this section, we're going to talk about another of one of Halston's signatures, and that is his use of beading in appliqué. Now, Chris, in your collection, you've got the burgundy bugle beaded dress that was worn at the Versailles Gala in 1973. And we can see, just by looking at the way that this dress sits on the model in the pictures of your collection, how extremely heavy it is. So how did this kind of heaviness work with Halston's aesthetic of minimalism and ease? Because the two of them seem at odds with each other.
Well, during the early part of the 70s, beading was very limited. There was very few beaders that, especially in New York, they basically did a lot of costumes for Broadway shows. But beading was there wasn't a lot of variety because you needed people that really knew the different techniques of beading and also the understanding of the sewing of the bugle beads versus the paillettes, sequins, and everything else in there. So he was looking around. A lot of times during that time, he would have like a jersey, and then they would have what is called an overlay of paillettes that were stitched on there, but he wasn't satisfied with that. The burgundy dress is a jersey that is, cut with gores and a bias, and it is very heavy because it's all bugle beaded. The bugle beads are all systematically put together, and then on top of that, there is what is called the paillette or sequin with the red dot in there. And what it does is that when the light hits it, it diffuses. It goes all over the place. But the weight of that dress, Betsy Theodopoulos Kaiser wore it. And poor Betsy, it was like she looked incredible in it. But when she twirled, you couldn't twirl a lot because the weight of the skirt, because it was gored, kept throwing her off. So she had to move very slowly in the actual event. But and Halston was trying to figure out how to do beads in regards to Martha Graham as well, it was difficult because there wasn't that much that could be done as far as techniques at that point. So when NAEEM's father came to pitch his company that was in India, NAEEM, basically, he was about 18. When NAEEM came in, they spoke, and when Halston realized, what NAEEM's family could do as far as beading, it was like a revelation, and it was like, that's how it started. He told NAEEM, you could intern with me, and, it actually gave him, I think, a magazine, I can't remember, it was Look or Life magazine on Halston's style, and gave it to NAEEM, who was 18, and he didn't quite know what he was getting into, let's put it that way, but he was fabulous. NAEEM is a great friend, and he's so talented.
As we kind of moved through the 70s, Halston used a lot of glassy sequins as one of these kind of design signatures. And do you think that this was the first step in Halston's design process of mastering the art of appliqué, moving away from this heaviness towards more drape and fluidity?
Yes, because you see, NAEEM came in and he had knowledge, and they also had, sample textiles of what could be done, and NAEEM obviously was trained by Halston, where he wanted things to be lighter, more fluid, and that the hand of the actual beading could be lighter. Now, his father's company could do that. NAEEM did a lot of very interesting pieces, for Halston, NAEEM's family. They created the beading where it was like they used what was called silk organza and chiffon, and then all of a sudden it became lighter and much more gossamer, and it also with the beaded, the indigo blue one that I wore for the China trip, it's all nude chiffon and silk organza lining, and then it gives a sheerness to the actual dress, but it was also much lighter.
So NAEEM Khan joined Halston in 1978, is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
So the question is how Halston's use of beading and embroidery in his designs changed at this point, and what new opportunities and this collaboration between NAEEM's family and Halston Designs, the opportunities that brought.
I think the opportunity was, if you look at, let's say, the purple indigo dress, if you really look hard, you can actually see, I had given Halston a book, Jacques Cousteau's Sea Life, and he loved nature. He was always inspired by nature and by organic shapes and things like that. And he focused on one particular ocean scene, and he had it blown up, and he actually created a design pattern, and you could actually see like almost like a little seahorse. Beautiful. And it's like, it's also translated into what we call the ballerina dress, which is a pink, but it gives it a completely different look. And you can see in that some of the pieces have different sort of like the fabric is more open, it's more, it's not so densely embroidered, it's like spread out. So it gives a very interesting sort of texture to it and glint. And then when it's on the body, it gives that sheerness, but it also, you can see the body in it as well. He also did other pieces with what is called the fireworks. The fireworks were amazing because it was inspired by fireworks. He did numerous variations on it, on tulle, as well as the golden beaded one I have. But it was quite, spectacular because it conveyed the quality of glamour, but you also had a much lighter look about it.
I think when we compare these items in your collection, if we start off with the red burgundy dress from Versailles, and we then look at the sea life pattern gown, you can really see that evolution in technique and design that Halston really kind of pioneered, and that moved away from the heavy beading into this kind of beautiful fluid drapery, but not losing any of that richness of the surface or the embellishment of the fabric. When you juxtapose the two of them together, you really see that evolution of Halston's thinking and his design process.
Exactly, because also if you match them in blow-ups, you can see the denseness, the fabric, as well as the beading with the burgundy one for Versailles. But then you can see the sheerness and the delicate nature of the sea flower, the fireworks. They're all their backings. You can tell the body is in there. You can see that. The quality of the beaders was so superb with NAEEM's family. NAEEM's family did all the beading for the royal family.
In terms of the design, would Halston talk to the family about this idea and how he would like it to look? And then, what would then happen? Would they make samples and send them to Halston, or would he have a much more kind of hands-on approach to the final design?
Well, NAEEM was in charge of communicating and handling the patterns and everything. He was very, very aware of what Halston wanted and needed. And he was fabulous in the workroom because they would work on patterns for the dress so that the actual what was unique, that the beading was done specifically for that dress. So it wasn't a mass production beading by the roll. You know, it was specifically designed on the dress so that my particular indigo purple dress, you don't really see anything on the woman, even though it's semi-sheer. You don't see the private areas. You know, it's all beautiful, but it's orchestrated incredibly well, and it really shows that, you know, there was a total regard and respect to making sure that it envelops and wraps around the woman's body, but it doesn't really reveal.
Yeah, the firework design that you have, you've got a top and a trouser set in your collection. That same design was used on black chiffon as well, where the bursts were kind of multicolored. Is that right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah. He did a variation of those because it was he went in very different avenues to experiment on the fireworks, but then also to develop it in the dolman sleeve shape, and then also the different tops and how it would relate and how you could wear it. And you didn't feel like you had 10, 20, 100 pounds on you of beading, because the old way was very heavy. Those dresses were very heavy, you know. So these opened up numerous opportunities for him to give glamour.
In your collection, you've got a lot of these triangular scarves that have the metal studs on them. So do you think that in terms of, you know, we talked about this evolution from the Versailles dress to the sea life pattern gown, do you think then that these metal studs that came later were like the next step in Halston's appliqué journey?
Well, I think he was fascinated with, you know, the development of studs, and I think that he experimented in numerous ways. You'll find that with Halston, he didn't just try it with one thing. He would try it in numerous ways to see how it could all be coordinated in the collection. The silver and studs was basically a large, a medium, and a small stud flat. Then it would be incorporated into suede or ultra suede. It could be done in the belts. And then he incorporated in 1982 his fall winter collection, the silver and studs, as a look, very much making a statement. He did it in his gloves, his belts, and his jackets, well as the hats. He also incorporated in his Andy Warhol ads, and you can see the silver and studs in that group. He wanted to give it a slightly harder edge, and he wanted a little more glamour in there, but it was more, he had to do it his way.
And it's really interesting, the metal stud is a harder look for Halston. I think that might be, in my opinion, a kind of response, because these kind of metal studs start coming in the very late 70s and early 80s, and shift in fashion in that time where everything starts to become a lot more severe, and silhouettes start to become shaped and broad, and everything has a kind of harder edge to it. And I think that this might have been Halston's attempt to create a harder edge to his designs. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. He wanted to push it, you know. He wanted to have the exaggeration in there and have the glamour, because studs were, you know, Western looks were becoming very popular. And I think he realized that he liked the studs, but it was something where he had to do it his way. So he thought he could sort of exaggerate, push it a little more, but refine it as well.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of Halston, is he reacts to a particular movement in fashion, but he does it his way. He always embraces a new fashion or a new trend, but does it in his language as a designer.
Exactly.
Again, it just is testament to him being a true original.
He wasn't afraid to experiment. If he figured that he had something, he would be incessant and passionate about refining enough to make it his own statement.
Now, in the late 1970s, as the fashions moved towards wider silhouettes, how did Halston create volume without using heavy, bulky materials and undergarments?
To create volume without heaviness, Halston experimented in his draping with a specific fabric each time. The coats had to be done a certain way, and the dresses had to be developed while draping on the model. He rarely used shoulder pads.
Now, Chris, in your collection there is a silk taffeta gown with infinity shawl that has a real Charles Jamesian quality to it. I'm thinking James's umbrella dress and ribbon dress. So as a designer, would you agree Halston took the essence of Charles James's rigid structural garments and relaxed them?
Since I was very lucky to have worn both Halston and Charles James designs, I must say Halston not only made it much easier to wear, but it still maintained a chic and elegant and easy way of dressing. Charles James designs were very rigid since it had so much construction inside the garment.
The Metropolitan Museum of Art holds in its collections 2 quilted jackets bearing the Halston label. Now, the first is purple and dates from the collection in 1970, where James was hired as a garment technician. The second, which dates from 1975, shows how Halston evolved the design to adapt more to the modern woman. Why do you think Halston always put the comfort of his wearer at the centre of his garment construction and design ethos?
Okay, Scott. I think, well, let's put it this way. All Halston designs were developed to make the woman look amazing, but still have a relaxed comfort level while wearing the garment. On the other hand, Charles James designs had a lot of structure in the garment, which sometimes suppressed the woman's movement quite a bit.
So, like Charles James, would it be fair to say that Halston constantly reworked garment construction and techniques in order to evolve his designs?
Yes, like Charles James, Halston constantly reworked his designs and evolved his ideas over the decades. For example, you can see in his iconic sarong dress, which he changed many times over the years with numerous prints and fabrics such as chiffon, velvet, lycra, and lame.
With the American Beauty dress, formerly in your collection and now part of the collection at FIT, how did Halston create such a full and voluminous skirt using such light and fluid fabrics?
Halston and his staff were very knowledgeable in their draping and pattern making to begin with, especially in developing garments with a bias cut. The backing in the actual dresses were lined in organza, which helped in creating a light and voluminous look to the gown.
We see in your collection Halston's treatment of the exaggerated shoulders through his cashmere and double-faced Duchess satin evening coats. How did Halston cut and manipulate his fabric to achieve such volume without the use of bulky shoulder pads or supports?
A lot was done in how Halston manipulated and draped the fabric on the model to create those new shoulder shapes. To create a new exaggerated shoulder, Halston draped and pinned the fabric on the model to create those new shoulder shapes. Once he was happy with the silhouette, it was taken off the model and steamed into that shape. Then it was made into a new pattern and tried on again.
So, Chris, as the fashionable silhouette became more structured and aggressive in the 1980s, how did Halston adapt his aesthetic to suit these new changing styles?
Well, the first thing was that with the more, you might say, Claude Montana and Thierry Mugler looks, they were very, very constructed and very restrictive, when you put them on. It was the shape of it that created your body. What Halston thought was, because he wasn't a particular fan of shoulder pads to begin with, because they moved too much, and if it wasn't set, a certain way, it didn't look great. And he wanted the woman to be able to move in a casual way and look great all the time. So he created various, what is called U-shaped shoulder pads, where it was very skinny from the top and then slightly higher on the top and then went down the back. and then he would put that underneath the dress and especially the coats. So it gave it an increase and a structure for it to hold out more, so that it did give you more of a widened shoulder, but it wasn't as exaggerated, and it moved with the woman. So that's what he really wanted to do.
I guess that technique maintained a certain level of softness in the silhouette, although it was wider. Yeah.
Yeah, because the softness was, it was very graded and thin down the actual back and the front of the dress. The thickness came across that shoulder, so that the thickness was really on top, so it elevated the look, and it was slightly extended, so if you had a jacket or a coat, you could gently extend it out, so it gave it more of a presence of a shoulder, but it didn't, it was very, very different. You could notice it slightly, but it was not an exaggeration.
And I guess that links in with what I said earlier about embracing a new fashionable style or trend, but doing it the Halston way. Yeah. Talking about shoulders, you did mention Halston's collaboration with AKIRA MAKI, create like voluminous ruffles. A lot of other designers were doing ruffle garments, but how did Halston's ruffles differ from other designers?
Halston always was fascinated with ruffles, but I think part of the problem was that they tended, at a certain point, if you made them too wide, they droop. So they looked floppy. He wanted them to sing, to have like little wings. So when he hired AKIRA, AKIRA had the ability to do what is called a bias cut ruffle. So he could create a wider ruffle on the actual dress. And because of the way it was structured, and because his design staff knew how to work with bias, he created these beautiful, new looking ruffle dresses with much more poofiness on the shoulders, and then also taking the bias cut and swirling it around the body. There's a beautiful ad where it's all ruffles and it just goes right around the body. But when we went to the Met, he made all these silk taffeta outfits for us.
Absolutely love that image of Halston standing in a sea of ruffles.
Right, with all its girls and all the colors and everything. But they were beautiful because the silk taffeta, he could actually extend it up so it stood out beautifully, and it was just so thin that it did not look heavy, because unfortunately a lot of times in the past, you can see designers doing, the ruffled dress, but it looked very heavy-handed. With Halston, it was always very lightweight. That was part of, getting the right design staff. Halston was very diligent about how he chose people. He was very careful over, that they understood that they had to be open enough to accept new ideas, but their training, like Salvador Cardelli, Senior, he was trained by Balenciaga, and then Suzanne was trained by Cardass. So you had some of the best people, a lot of diversity, because they came from all over, Europe, as well as you'd have Europe, you had France, you had Italy, and you had, others from all types of countries to come to work with Halston.
And AKIRA MAKI, he was Japanese, yeah?
Yes, AKIRA was Japanese. All of them had incredible ability to create these, because it's one thing to have an idea to make it look like that. It's another thing to have the workroom do it. And Halston knew. The beauty about Halston's workroom was they were very faithful, and they knew Halston's discipline, which a lot of other companies would never even think of it, because it was so challenging to make these new looks, and Halston did.
And he was just surrounding himself by such talented designers, cutters, you know,
Exactly.
he really was meticulous when not only in his design process, but also in choosing the people around him to be part of his team.
That's right. He knew his staff was just as important, you know, because if they understood and he could communicate with them, then you create magic. If you have, let's say, certain people that unfortunately just didn't know how to create that likeness, you can't do it. I think he learned a lot when he was doing hats. When he was at Bergdorf Goodman, he was friends with Givenchy and a lot of, you know, he saw all the couture workrooms, so he knew the quality of these craftsmen, and you know, his family was his workroom. He was very faithful to them, and you know, it was very important that when we moved to the Olympic Towers, the workroom was amazing. They had half a block just with the workroom, and they had a view of Central Park. And you know, he was very, he gave them a party when, you know, we moved over, so they would not feel, you know, that they were losing anything. And they loved Halston. They loved him.
Getting back to the ruffles, I think in the 80s when we had this expansive shoulders and stuff, you know, we talked about this before. This was Halston's way of doing the big shoulder, but doing it in his aesthetic and his way, and fitting a bias cut ruffle, removing all that bulk that is so associative with the 1980s, but still producing the width and the volume, but just taking away all the bulk. I just think that his ruffles are some of the most beautiful garments that have ever been created. As his fit model, what was it like having these beautiful structures, these ruffles created whilst you were amidst all the fabric?
First of all, you know, a lot of them were done in organza silks and things like that, so they were very lightweight. And the model could do, you know, what he wanted. We knew how he wanted to turn and how to move things, but, you know, he knew how to frame the face, you know, because the face was the client's most important. She should look beautiful. Yeah. And with the ruffles in there and framing the face in that way, it was very easy for the woman to wear. But now as the model, you would wear it and you'd look beautiful because it was very easy to manipulate. And then when you walked down the runway, you were not dealing with so much heaviness that you could actually twirl and move and be able to convey that sense of glamour and elegance in a very good way.
Yeah, and going back to that image of Halston, you know, surrounded in these beautiful women in these gorgeous ruffle blouses, I think it's just such an iconic image. And like you say, every single woman, her beautiful face is just framed by these gorgeous, gorgeous ruffles. I've said this before, I'll say it again, it is literally one of my favourite Halston images. I just love it. That brings us on to our last question, which talks specifically about another piece that's in your collection, Chris. It is a sequin and beaded reversible multi-ribbon top. What I wanted to ask you was how Halston approached the complexities of designing a garment that could basically be worn back to front and front to back without compromising the way that it looked and the overall aesthetic of the design.
Well, we had numerous times in the past, sometimes some of the dresses that would come in and the tops somehow didn't work, you know, when we were putting them together. And we would try this technique, reverse it, put it the reverse way, back to front. And some of them worked so well because of the fabric, the lending of the fabric, that it was something that when we start doing the beading, a lot of times when you do the beading, you have to wait, you know, and then they come in pieces and then they're sewn up. Now, when we saw it that way, we had, it was all based in and sewn. And it was like, oh my God, you know, tying it this way looks great. And then the back looked so fabulous, full across, that we decided, well, switch it around and let's see if it could. Now that, because the way it was structured, you were able to do that. Not all of them were like that, but it was something where, that again, cutting on the bias, doing a dolman sleeve, and by pushing it up, you get that nice volume in the actual shoulder, but you could actually wear it front to back, and it looks incredible both ways.
And it really does look incredible both ways. The way that it's styled on the mannequin and the images in the collection, as soon as I saw it, I was just so intrigued by, just how beautiful it looks, both front ways and back ways. And it's just absolutely, it's perfection. It's so beautiful.
Well, when I styled it, because when I worked with the photographer, I wanted to make sure that, we really got the understanding of back to front, front to back, in a full visual, because it's so stunning, but it's also so unique, and that pattern, the ribbon pattern, was so unique to begin with, the curls and the swirls and everything. And that's a very unique pattern of different combination of things with the bugle beads. And you also had shiny and you had matte. When you take a look at it closer, you see the intricacy of that as well. It's one of definitely a very fabulous piece, one of my favorites in there, because it's like front to back, and it's like, everything you want in there. We were starting to develop what is called more, not an easy way of dressing, but more an intelligent way, where if you got a fabulous top like that, for winter, you might want to do it with a black velvet. There was a lot of ladies that, would go to Palm Beach in California, they would not necessarily wear velvet because it was warm climate. They would wear silk chamois. That's where we integrated the ability, on this higher tier, that you're the one empowered, that you can wear the actual beaded top with a, white silk chamois looking fabulous. But then if you have to go to a gala, let's say in the winter time, you could switch it out and it would look completely different.
And how these garments could empower women, I guess, to make those choices. And I think that's something that Halston always had at the forefront of his design process, was the empowerment of women, and always putting the client, their comfort, their elegance first.
Exactly. He had some very powerful women that were business people, and they not only didn't have the time, but they had to look good, and they had to look very chic, and really in a way that just put them way up front. That they were, you could tell they were smart and elegant women. And I think that he realized, whether you had society women or whether you had entertainers, the more ease that could go into the clothes, the more they felt fabulous and they looked great in photographs. Because if you don't feel good, you're not going to take such a great picture, which is something that you're happy to wear.
Now, Chris, what do you think it was about ULTRASUEDE that attracted Halston?
ULTRASUEDE was a very different fabric, since it was not woven. It was created like a felt, therefore it did not stretch. What attracted Halston to ULTRASUEDE is that it looked and felt like suede, but it was very versatile in various product lines, from clothing to luggage. It also had a large color palette of colors, which Halston loved.
The shirtwaist dress, or model number 704, launched in 1972, was one of Halston's best-selling models. Why do you think it was such a huge success?
Halston clients loved the suede look, as well as Halston's interpretation of a modern, chic shirtwaist dress, which could be worn from day to evening. Now, Scott, this is what's interesting. During that time, Halston also created another successful shirtwaist dress in gray flannel, which he called the Executive Women's Power Dress. The way he designed the collar and the buttoning of the dress allowed the woman to wear any type of jewelry from day to evening, but still remain elegant and empowered for the business meetings. By changing the shirtwaist style into ultra suede, he created a new women's empowered dress.
I just want to say a huge thank you for taking time out to do this interview. It's been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.
Good. Well, it was a pleasure.
Halston evolved and developed as a designer by constantly reworking his designs, mixing simple and minimalistic silhouettes with luxurious fabrics and redefining the ethos of American fashion. Through her amazing archive and insider perspective, Chris Royer has provided a new dimension to Halston as a true fashion original, designer and genius, and added so much more to the designer's story other than just the stratospheric rise and catastrophic fall of a superstar designer. Chris Royer, Model and Muse, a huge thank you to you and your team, and that's it for this episode of Fashion And. I'll see you next time, but before you go, don't forget to subscribe to Fashion And with me, Scott Schiavone, Fashion Curator.